somebody gets a horrible diagnosis to some health issue, and they're very brave about it at first, and God will take care of it. It's usually a month or two into the chemo or whatever it is, and they're asking, where's God in all of this? Things take a while to sink in, and sometimes as we look at suffering and corruption and different things in the world, we say, where's God in all of this? Well, we're not alone in this, because generally when somebody has an honest faith, they ask honest questions. And that's where we are with Habakkuk. He is so on our time, even though we're going back nearly 3 millennia. 2,600 years ago, halfway across the world, in an entirely different culture, and this man is just like us. And so here's kind of how the story went down. It's rather unique because if you know the job of an Old Testament prophet, they didn't say too much to God. God spoke to them, and they listened and trembled, and they went and told other people. But in this case, Habakkuk, with the situation going on around him, the world was a scary place, and he was driven to ask God questions and then wait and see what God would say. And so we take this journey with him as we look at the questions he was asking. Now, let me bring you a bit into his world. We're somewhere around 600 BC, and Israel has divided. Now, this is hard to believe, but nations really divide on political and religious reasons. And Israel was such a country. So they divided to the north, where you had all the progressive liberal types who were into what the world was up to doing. And then you had all the conservative types down in the south, in the southern kingdom. So you had Israel to the north and Judah to the south. And they didn't really care much for each other because if you're a conservative, well, liberals are stupid. And if you're a liberal, conservatives are stupid. And so here we are with this divided nation. And the northern nation played ball with the world and eventually lost. They fell to Assyria, the superpower of the day. And they were completely absorbed. They were taken off their land, brought to other cultures. They disappeared, no more to be seen. Judah went on, and we're another century into this situation. That's where Habakkuk is, down there in the conservative south. And they call themselves the remnant because they're the last of God's true people, believers. And at least that's what they say. Now here's the problem, is that Habakkuk's down there with all those good church folk down south in Judah, and he says, I listen to what God has to say, and I look at what God tells us to do, and then I look at the nation and the culture in which I live, and they don't look the same. They're supposed to. Everybody says we're the remnant. And what he finds is that those conservatives are no better than the liberals, except they have religious wrapping. And he says, this can't go on. God is going to do something. And it starts raising a few big questions in his mind. See, he saw what happened when people went the wrong way in the north and they disappeared. And now in the south, the only way that they really follow God is in lip service. It's about the only way it's getting done. And he knows that this doesn't make sense, because how can you profess to be people of God, expect God's grace and God's protection, and not be living anything like God told you to live? Or on the flip side, if there's that level of corruption going on in the country, how long will God just let it go on? How can he let it continue? So to make matters worse, Assyria was bad enough. They wiped out the northern end of the country. Now Judah had a kind of a tenuous peace going on with them. They could put up a fight if they had to, but on the radar, now on the landscape, was coming a new superpower, Babylon. And Babylon made Assyria look like Boy Scouts. That's a plug for James and Alex. these guys, and they were unstoppable. Egypt, that big power, no problem. In, wipe them out. Assyria went in and wiped them out as well in the great battle of Nineveh. So here on the horizon, not only were things corrupt within the culture and godless, now there was this great threat going on outside the culture. The world was a really scary place. Isn't it funny how an old question is still a new question? We get into situations where something just seems as going on, and we say, how long is this going to go on? How long? It might be something within the society, it might be something within personal life. If it's something and you've been asking for a day, that day can feel like a year. And if you've been asking for a year, it can seem like a lifetime. That's where Habakkuk was. We're looking back in time, so for us, we tend to gloss over it. We can read 100 years of history in 3 sentences if we go back and look in the books. But put ourselves in his place. He is living in this scary world, inside and out. How long can this keep going on? There's a great blessing in this, a great tool if we don't gloss over it. Because see, when we ask how long, it's minute by minute. But if we go back and look at somebody 3 millennia ago, we have like almost 3,000 years to see what was going on and how all the pieces of the puzzle fit. In effect, we're kind of like seeing it through God's eyes. We're seeing something happen, but against the backdrop of eternity. And that's how God sees everything. That's how he saw Habakkuk. That's how he sees our time today. So we can learn a lot by looking at this very real issue in the time of Habakkuk, this minor prophet. Verses Habakkuk 1, 2-3 says, I cry to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. I wonder if Habakkuk had waited, maybe he could have got that book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. Seems we're asking the same questions today, aren't we? Same questions as you turn on your TV, you can see all kinds of stuff you just don't want to be seeing. Shootings and beheadings and wars and all kinds of things going on. You say, well, I don't even want to watch this anymore. I don't know about you, I don't even tend to answer my landline on the first call because you look and you say, oh, it's another scammer. And that'll be true 9 out of 10 times. Sometimes you wonder who out there is still following any level of righteousness. And Habakkuk was in the same way. Habakkuk 1:4, he says, for the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. How many things in our own time that once we consider them bad, but now they're considered good, or things that were good are now considered bad. It's things that were once sacred, now are good for a laugh. Just go on and give a very clear view of just classic Christian beliefs, and probably it wouldn't be long before you're labeled either homophobic, racist, bigoted, or profoundly stupid. It just surrounded. But you know what? The thing about this is it's nothing new, is that righteousness has always been in the minority, even 3,000 years ago. So Habakkuk finds himself in this nation that's priding itself as being the remnant of God, and he's asking, how long can an unholy world scoff in the very face of God? How long can it go on? And so God answers him, and that's the cool thing. If we had nothing but questions, what would be the point? We get the same questions. How does God answer questions like that? Habakkuk 1:5-7. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, and that's what they called the Babylonians back then. That bitter and hasty nation who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Well, if you had people like that sitting on your border, I bet you would dread them too. And you would be in fear, especially if you're thinking, we're counting on God and we're not even following Him. I imagine you would be filled with fear and dread. And sure enough, they do fall, and they go into captivity for 70 years, and there's plenty of reason for them to fear. So how does God deal with His people when they are flirting with evil? And this question is just as valid today as it is in their day. You say you're God's people, or we say we follow God. We have some level of profession. We're not bad people. And God says, well, if you look at relative morality, maybe you seem a little better than the person beside you. But no, we're not all that great. So how does God deal with people who flirt with the evil? Interesting. Here's a wrong question. Probably some of you that have been in our teen program, that used to be a big thing, is how far can you go before you lose your salvation? And it's like, wrong question. That's just, if that's where you're going, then there's maybe a problem with salvation in the first place. But Israel did that. How much can we flirt with evil? But God does this really strange thing. You would think that if you were a church or you're a nation and you're somewhat godly, at least you still have the wrapping, God would use people who are really godly or really righteous to come in and teach you a lesson if He was going to punish, discipline, or allow things to follow a course. But He seems to do the opposite. He takes those people and He allows them to fall under the weight of an even more evil people. He allows evil to teach His lessons sometimes. Kind of strange, isn't it? God uses everything. Not that God does evil, not that God is evil, but He will use evil. In this case, for Judah, He allowed this horrific nation to come in and obliterate them for a length of time. How long? So, the first part of the question, God answers Habakkuk like this, verse 3, "For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. It seems slow. Wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay." God's timing is perfect. We ask how long? Till the perfect time. And the perfect time, in the case of Israel, was at a number of points. At the perfect time, He allowed them to be punished. He allowed them to fall under the weight of their own evil. Then at the perfect time, He delivered them from it, so that at the perfect time, a Messiah could come, so that at a perfect time there was a new covenant, and we're sitting here today because God made all the parts fit together perfectly. How do you know the perfect time? Well, only God knows the perfect time. How does God know? Because God measures the time against eternity, not just in the day-to-day. It's a look at eternity as a whole, because God's not worried so much about where you are today or tomorrow. It's where will you end up in a million years. That's the way God looks at things in eternity. So God will do the perfect thing in the perfect time with perfect justice, just the way it needs to come down. But what about the evil? So He allows evil to have its way, yes, for a day. But then He allows evil to work its full course. And that's what He did with the Babylonians. "Woe to you, Chaldeans," this is Habakkuk 2:6 through 8, "because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. By cutting off many peoples, you have forfeited your own life." History and prophecy tend to go the same way. Every nation that is truly evil falls. It's inevitable. No matter what the level of power they seem to have, they ultimately fall. And usually God is using them as a wake-up call for the rest of us. So the first question, how long? Till my perfect time. What are you going to do about this I'll let evil play out its own course, and maybe you'll learn a lesson from it. But it leads Habakkuk into a second question. It's that one of relative morality. And usually, as church people, we can be kind of prone to this, is that you hear a really good sermon and you go, boy, I wish Joe was here today. He could have really stood to hear that one. Or every now and then I can be up here and I can watch your wife do this. Not too often a husband knows better. But, we get into, even ourselves, relative morality. The thing is that God isn't into relative morality. But Habakkuk tried it too, so it's not surprising. Habakkuk 1:13, he says, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallow up the man more righteous than he? Profound question, isn't it? This is back to that thing we were asking, but it says, well, these people are bad, but they're not that bad. They're not as bad as those people. And God says, no, that's not the way it works. You're either with God or you're not. You're either in sync with God or you're not. Sin is simply walking away from God, whether that's 1 foot or 10 feet. Being with God is being with God. Evil is not being with God. So as the people strayed away, he said, all right, if you want to flirt with evil, then I'll let you have the full effect of what evil does. And so we have Babylon crushing people who were, quote, more righteous than they were. No question when you look at it. Sin is sin. We're either with or we're not with God. We're either following his ways or we're not. And there's a line that we can cross. And here's where God's grace comes in. There's a line we can cross. And no one knows it but God. Whether you're a person and you're straying away, there's a line that you will cross where under your own free will you would never, ever come back. Your choice has pretty well been sealed. The same thing can happen for a nation or a society of people. There's a line we can cross where we go beyond that point that we'll ever choose righteousness again. God knows the line. And so with Judah, what he did was before they crossed the line, he crushed them with evil that would eventually purge them. And a penitent Judah would end up coming back. It seems to be one of the last truths we learn, that sin is sin. And the wages of sin is death. And that God doesn't cater to relative morality. It really doesn't matter if you're better than that person sitting next to you. That's not going to go very far with God. We're either alive in him or we are not. But that leads to an interesting question, because see, Habakkuk was in real life situations, just like here. Just imagine if in America that some totally evil force like this came in and took over the country. Heaven forbid, hope we never ever see it. But let's just say it did. And let's just say, like in real life, there are a whole lot of people who are still truly righteous, are faithful, are truthful, are still walking right with God. They are going to suffer along with everyone else. If God were to punish a nation, excuse me, with weather, you know what? Hurricanes don't miss houses. They don't say, Pastor Kevin's a really bad dude. We'll wipe out his house, but we're going to skirt that wind around the Kendall house. That doesn't work that way. Sorry, Kev. Is that we all get hit by the hurricane. Do you remember a quote, and it's actually by an English pastor a long time ago by the name of John Donne, and he said this, no man is an island. You remember that? Part of a message he gave, actually. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Finishing with another famous quote, he says at the end of this one, I am involved in mankind and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. It's always been that way. You make a decision good or bad, and it doesn't just impact you. It impacts everyone around you. Maybe even people you don't know. Make a decision that's righteous. Make a decision that involves God. It's on track. And you'll affect people around you. Make something that is a bad decision, an evil decision, and it will affect other people around you. That's the way it is, the way it's always been. So Habakkuk's asking this question because isn't that a dilemma? If you have righteous people and they still suffer under this impact because of evil decisions that they didn't have the power to change at all. We had quite a chat about that one in the first service, and a lot of good answers came up as, how does that work? How would God answer that? When Habakkuk says, well, what about the righteous that are still here? What about them? And God gives a good explanation. You can read the first couple of the chapters of Habakkuk for yourself if you'd like. But his final line in all of this is a very curious line. He kind of ends, and this is the main thought of it, but the righteous shall live by his faith. What does that even mean? The righteous shall live by his faith. Well, it changes a little bit in the English, and if we were to go back in the original language of the day, word for word, if you follow, you kind of get the gist. It would read more like this: the righteous one in faith of him, he shall live. Now here's the difference I see, is that when you simply say the just shall live by faith, the righteous shall live by faith, it's almost like a mandate. If you're righteous, you're going to live by faith because that's what you're told to do. Or even to the effect of, well, it's a feature of righteousness, so you'll live by faith. But in fact, the flavor of this is that, yes, if the righteous and faith goes together, but you don't practice faith simply because you're righteous. The fact that you practice faith is what will allow you to live. In effect, righteousness or faith is a secret weapon by which people survive in their righteousness. Hearts grow cold in hard times. People give up their faith in hard times. People are crushed and confused in hard times, but it is faith that allows you to keep living. And that's the answer he gives to Habakkuk. So you start wondering, and here's the thing about this term, right? The righteous shall live by faith. You know, when something jumps covenants, so we've got the Old Testament, we've got the New Testament, and there's only a few things, of course it's all based together, but there's only a few times that verbatim you will find a saying, a concept, verbatim in the New Testament from the Old. When you see something like that, you know it's really important to understand. And in this case, you'll find that saying 3 times at least in the New Testament. It's not just a Habakkuk. So it's not just an Old Testament thing, it is an entire Bible thing. So what does it really mean? How are we saved by our faith? How do we survive by our faith? Well, not surprising, one of the books you would turn to, since this started as a Hebrew idea, is in the book, in the New Testament, is the book of Hebrews. And in the book of Hebrews, in the New Testament, it defines faith. It's all about faith. It says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction or evidence of things not seen. What is hoped for, but what is not seen. Think of Habakkuk's time. He's looking, the world looks one way, but God promises something else. You have a choice, don't you? Which are you going to follow? God says if you just follow what your eyes see in the moment, that you won't survive. That's basically what it comes down to. And I'm not going to read a whole bunch of texts from Hebrews. Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, let me just throw out to you the concepts that we might find in that book, talking about what this faith thing is. Faith is a relationship. It's like the relationship between Abel and God, that Abel was able to offer exactly what God asked. Faith is something you need to have, or it's impossible to please God because you won't even really believe that He's there. Faith is what allowed Noah to take proper action when his eyes told him something else, and to endure for so long a time. Faith gave Abraham the courage to head out and start a great inheritance in which we're actually part of. Faith is what empowered Moses to save a whole nation from Egypt. Jesus alone is your perfecter of faith. Jesus alone is the perfecter of faith. So faith is a relationship with God. Faith is a mindset. Faith is a practice. Faith is a power. Faith is what allows a person to do what is right. Faith is what allows you to endure and end right. Faith is what allows you to do what you cannot do. Faith is what allows you to see what is real when your eyes are fooled by what's in front of them. Faith does a lot of things. Faith is the conviction that God is always right. There's the bottom line. Faith is that conviction that God is always right. He's always perfect. He's always trustworthy. He always is. We believe the history that we look at. Faith is a muscle. Faith is a spiritual gift. Faith is a choice. And faith is an objective. So what do you take away from something like Habakkuk that's so real life, but it just says, here are the facts, you figure it out for yourself almost, and you take that and you look at it. Well, let me throw just a few takeaways to you, share a few of them this morning. If we look at Habakkuk's life, we find out this: it's okay to be confused by times. It's okay to be confused, especially when life gets harsh, because Habakkuk did. It's okay to question God, as long as the questions are coming from a heart that really expects an answer back, because that's what worked for Habakkuk. And it's okay to question God and wait for an answer, understanding that the answer that comes may not be something you ever expected or ever imagined, because that's how God works. Faith is our secret weapon. It's the secret weapon that will allow you to survive in your darkness, however dark that may be. It is the secret weapon that will allow you to face your dread. It's the one that will allow you to survive through your suffering. Faith is what we live by. Faith is what we live by. The question, I guess, is we look at books like Hebrews and we look at what faith is defined by God really is, and we find ourselves asking, if that's what makes you live, am I really living by that? If we're not, it doesn't matter if we're in here or not. It doesn't matter what we believe when we go out from here. Unless we are living by our faith, that's how we stay alive, because God said so. Are we living truly by faith?
Good morning, everybody. Is there a more difficult question in the Christian faith than why is there evil in the world? Is there a more difficult personal question than why do bad things happen to good people? Pastor Kevin mentioned that God's response was that through faith, men are righteous. And I think that it's interesting because this question was something that even those who lived with Jesus Christ wrestled with. And so Paul said that we have salvation by grace through faith, so that we have no reason to boast of our works. Whereas James said that faith without works is dead. And yet here in Habakkuk we see the answer lies within the combination of these two, that our own works are insufficient for our salvation, but it is the works of God that can provide the salt and light to a society. In other words, it is the works of God through us as believers who have faith that can save a society from its true form. Well, what am I saying? I'm saying that God holds society together by common grace. And that when that common grace is removed because there is an insufficient input of God's work into that society, we see evil. In Romans 1, verse 18, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them." And God makes, and there's a promise in the scripture that for those who wish not to follow God's plan, God will allow them to do that. And eventually society will reach a tipping point when not enough people are in faith with God so that His grace can become a part of that society, that God will give that society over to its desires and its wishes. And the result is the true evil that is man without God. Before we go into prayer, I would like to say that this is an exquisitely deep and complex problem. This is an interesting question that all Christians need to explore, and so I implore you tonight, if you've never done it, please, tonight come out at 7 p.m., where Pastor Kevin will be discussing this further and deeper, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions and truly engage in this. And I believe that this is at the crux, this is the fulcrum of our Christian faith, and so this is a very important topic. Let us all bow our heads and pray. Abba, Father, I pray that through the example of Jesus Christ, that through faith, by grace, that you have saved us, that you have filled us and given us the opportunity to be children of light. That today, as we enter into the world, with this warning ringing in our ears, with an understanding of the questions that Habakkuk answered, and the fearful answer that you gave, that we become the salt and light in our society. Warnings are given while there is still time, while there is still light, work can be done, because soon the night will come when no work can be done. And so as we leave here today, I ask all of you to take very seriously the job that we have as children of light, to be the salt and light in the world, to be the common grace that God gives to our society, so that we can bring the wisdom of God back into our civilization. I pray all of this in the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Amen.